Ark and Aegis
by Andy Huang. Chapter 1.
Dinner served cold. 19th hour, 25th day, 12th month, year 806, post-Heavenfall. What did it mean to be a Sentinel? For most, it was an opportunity to serve the greater good and safeguard the hegemony of Mistoria. For Orion Meffrey, the memories of his wife's smile and the tight embrace of his young boy gave him the reasons he needed. As he sat at a large meeting table of dark stone, thousands of miles away from home, the yearning to see their faces again pushed him past the loneliness and isolation he felt for 11 long months. Thankfully, his tour was almost over. Success tonight meant he could finally replace the tearful faces of his departure with the joys of his return.
"It's quite nippy here," commented Medicator, interrupting his reverie.
She shivered, despite wearing a thick, long coat with a snarling hound embroidered at the back. "Even with all these fireplaces and the braziers, it's like there's a draft coming from somewhere."
"The short-term solution to that is more wine," Orion replied, as he refilled Medica's goblet.
He, too, wore the same colours of the Crimson War Dogs, and had done so for most of his time infiltrating her company. It took many displays of cunning, skill, and regrettable acts of ruthlessness to earn her trust and be promoted to one of the mercenaries' trusted lieutenants.
"It's about the only thing enjoyable here, Adams," Medica said, unknowingly using Orion's alias.
The food was barely hot when it arrived, and cold seconds later. "Let's hope whatever comes out of this is worthwhile. I'm starting to have my doubts after these accommodations." Orion looked around and counted at least a dozen sellsword companies represented by their respective delegates. Quiet chatter and small talk emanated among them as they sat under the vaulted roof of a secluded castle once belonging to giants. Everyone present had received the same invitation from the new king of the Imperial Union, Severus Locke, who wanted to discuss the next phase of its future. What those plans entailed was what the undercover Sentinel was after.
"I have no doubt it will," Medica said with a coy smile.
"Our host has a flair for dramatics and a cunning mind to back it up. If only you were there during the Civil War when we fought on his side. It was like being harbingers of the end of the world. Absolutely glorious." The chair reserved for the monarch remained empty, and conversations continued while Orion picked at his meal. He found himself gazing at a painted mural over the enormous fireplace, which depicted a series of historical events detailing the rise of the nation. The first panel portrayed Locke's coming to the shores of the Alenti Islands, where he was greeted by the ruling lord. In the backdrop was an army making landfall on rowboats, as well as silhouettes of dragons emerging in the skies. The next scene illustrated both men leading a brutal battle, alongside a flock of the same primordial creatures, as they unleashed an elemental storm on their enemies. The final panel showed the Alenti lord handing his crown to his partner from his deathbed, amidst a crowd of sorrowful citizens and a ruby-coloured dragon. Orion smirked at the romanticisation of the events, although they did share several truths. While he studied the mural, a series of loud knocks echoed from a set of double doors, silencing the conversations. The heavy doors were pulled open by a guard, and a herald's voice boomed across the hall. "All rise for His Majesty the King." As the mercenaries stood up from their seats, 3 individuals walked through the threshold. The leading man was dressed in dark, regal clothing with sharp folds and violet accents. The top of his shaved head was adorned with a platinum crown, while the face below was fierce and eagle-like. Behind him was a follower, who wore red robes and an ornate golden headdress. The third newcomer had an unusual hooded coat, which was black in some parts and colourfully checker-patterned in others. Their face bore a porcelain mask with a blank expression, and tucked under their arm was a large roll of cloth.
"Honoured guests, please be seated," the king in violet spoke, as he took the remaining chair,
his entourage standing behind him. I must admit, I am extremely pleased to recognise a lot of familiar faces here. Jack Darley of the Azure Skies, Medicator of the Crimson War Dogs, Phoenix Deho of the Vatalan Snakes, and others we've shared victories with. He smiled and nodded to each of the leaders, sharing mutual history. For those whom I have not acquainted myself with, I am Severus Locke, the first king of the Imperial Union. As illustrious as my bestowed title may be, I remain a humble servant to the Elenti citizens and the prime empress of our faith. He gave a modest bow to the mural. To safeguard this precious foothold we have won ourselves, I have ambitious plans that go beyond simply shoring up our borders. The proof of our prowess in the Kythian civil war has given my benefactors confidence in putting their faith in me to deliver further change and usher in a new era. Thus, I have invited you all to be a part of that. Let me introduce a recent associate of mine who wishes to bring forth a proposal. The sellswords who shared victories with the Union stared with eagerness in their eyes as the monarch waved for the one in the porcelain mask to step forward. Greetings, and thank you for this opportunity, Your Grace. Two voices, male and female, resonated simultaneously from behind the disguise. I call myself the Solitaire, but you may refer to me as whatever you like. They proceeded to unroll the cloth on the table, and Orion felt a lump in his throat as he recognised what he saw. This is a map of the Hegemony of Mistoria, and the location of every single one of their outposts, strongholds, military docks and garrisons, the Solitaire continued. The nation is rich and arcanely advanced thanks to recent innovations in arc sciences and its strategic location between 3 continents. Yet, in its prosperity, it has become complacent, arrogant, and vulnerable. Vulnerable? Medica scoffed. Even with dragons at our backs, the Hegemony's standing armies are no joke. Besides numbers, they're supplemented by ships flying on arc that make most of the world look like parlour tricks. They also have dragons of their own, added a delegate of the Azure Skies. All valid concerns, the Solitaire affirmed with a nod. We would indeed be agitating a behemoth, but as powerful as Mistoria has portrayed itself to be, it is actually now at its weakest. The way power is shared between its different commanderies makes mustering a unified force a bureaucratic sludge. The masked individual pointed to a mountain range labelled Nixian. Dwellers of this province have been under perpetual demonic incursions, while Cogheim to the west has yet to fully recover from the natural disasters over 20 years ago. The dragons mentioned have buried themselves in Langdra with their greed and wish for nothing of conflict. As for the rest, they moved their hand to the upper edges of the nation. They'll be turning their attention to a new horde of the Aboleth's thralls coming across the waters north. Once the Hegemon's armies sally out to meet them, we raid the coastlines of the west. And why exactly do we want to go here? Asked Barry Pye of the Fireguard. I understand they're probably brimming with riches, but why does the Union want it? You all just won yourselves a war, and now you want to start another? I will answer that, Severus interjected, standing back up. Besides resources for reconstruction and civil improvements, our benefactors are interested in helping to uncover and protect an ancient historical site that is sacred to them. Regardless, their contribution to its security will still require payment in one form or another. And what of retaliation, Your Grace? Say the raid is successful and we steal Mistoria's riches. It's only a matter of time before they just rear their head once the aboleths are dealt with. So what? Locke smiled devilishly. So, bureaucratic sludge or not, the fist of the Hegemon's armies is going to slam the Imperial Union so hard, this nation won't even be on any map anymore. The majority of the heads nodded in agreement. Let them,
They'll break upon our shores, and we will witness their annihilation.
What was unleashed during the Scythian civil war was but a sliver of the benefactor's power. A mere test! The king began to circle the table, making sure to look into each of the representatives' eyes. I was not being grandiose when I said I wanted to usher in a new era. Not just for the Imperial Union, but all of Haven. My coming to the Alenti Islands was not out of the charity or pity of my heart. It was because there is a power here, buried beneath, that can remake the world in our image.
With deep respect, Your Grace, Medica spoke.
I still am not sure why you need us to raid the Hegemony. Couldn't you dig up whatever you need? I'm sure the Azure Skies wouldn't mind playing in the dirt.
Members of the Skies jeered at her quip.
The power itself has a great hunger and requires sacrifice to be unleashed, the king answered. Rather than straining our own people and resources, I would much rather skim some from the top of Mistoria. All I ask is for you to bring me enough to sate its appetite. Do this, and I swear by the Empress that you will each have a place in this new world as its kings and queens.
How much do you need? Barry inquired.
That I'll disclose upon full agreement, but I can assure you that we have made the calculations on how large a force we need to succeed in this operation.
Brief silence hung over the table, followed by whispers and mumbling.
Eventually, Medica was the first to speak up. You've led us this far, my liege. The Crimson War Dogs will stand with you, assuming we have enough buy-in from the others. The representatives nodded and murmured in agreement as Locke returned to his seat with a grin of satisfaction.
Orion leaned in closer to the map and turned to the solitaire.
You seem very well informed regarding the Hegemony.
My network allows me access to their ruling elite, the solitaire replied, their tone almost rehearsed. I am privy to many details about the comings and goings of the state, as well as its security.
Most impressive. Orion made a mental note regarding this individual. If officials of his country had been compromised, he needed to figure out how to connect them to the solitaire.
Lastly, the monarch announced,
my colleague representing the Arcanists' College of Wexton has news he would like to share. You honour me with this opportunity, my king. The man in the red robe stepped forward and bowed. I am High Philosopher Yukai Moth, and the acting dean of Wexton. The school owes its survival to the Union for liberating us from Lord Ulster's tyranny. To show gratitude, we are willing to pledge our scholars to the cause and further your capabilities in the coming days ahead. We've also made great strides in research topics that may prove strategic in use. Most notably, our harvesting of raw arc. The sellswords made expressions of polite approval. Controlling Wexton meant they had access to one of the best homes for arcana research outside of Mistoria. Your services will be most invaluable, Dean Moth, Locke said to the arcanist, before turning back to the rest of the table. Now that you've heard the introductions, I would like to casually discuss the mundane details of contract negotiations. The guests chuckled, and the business talks began. Each sellsword group reintroduced themselves and boasted of their numbers, history, specialities, and qualities worthy of selection. If the king had his way, he would have been eager to involve all the companies gathered for different aspects of his campaign. Yet, his coffers were limited, and some groups were still sceptical of the grand scale of the operation or wanted greater down payments or assurances. The open nature of these discussions often led to sly remarks, insults, and old rivalries surfacing among the mercenaries. On more than one occasion, a leader would challenge another to an immediate duel to settle who better deserved the bid. Orion stayed out of the negotiations, while Medica took the lead. However, he kept detailed notes under the guise of helping the War Dog leader remember the specifics regarding their competitors. While the Fireguard and the Azure Skies traded jabs on who could provide the more robust supply lines, Orion felt a gentle tap on his shoulder. When he turned, he found himself staring directly at the porcelain mask of the solitaire.
Leos Adams, correct? They whispered, leaning in. I've heard about your exploits within the Crimson War Dogs.
There's a matter of minor importance I was hoping you would be willing to bring up with your superior later. Would you be willing to discuss it now, in private?
Now? Can it not wait until this meeting is over? Unfortunately, I have other business to attend to and must depart before the summit is over. Yet I wanted to introduce a separate contract to your company, since you all have a very solid reputation. Medica nodded towards Orion. Go ahead, Adams. I can take it from here. Orion politely excused himself from the table and followed the solitaire out the double doors. He was briefly led through a dimly lit corridor before entering a massive, empty chamber with columns lining the flanks. The air was freezing from the gusts of wind blowing from the gaping hole of a collapsed wall. Frost and snow clung to the surfaces, and even the ceiling above had icicles as large as stalactites. Magnificent, isn't it? The solitaire marvelled. Usually this area is a parade ground for the gathering of banners, but it used to be a great hall, a dancing room of the giants. Could you imagine giants dancing? I'd imagine the neighbours wouldn't have been too happy about the noise. The solitaire let out a dry, curt laugh. Might have been the reason for driving them out in the first place. They glanced around briefly before leaning in and whispering. I invited you here in privacy because we both have the same objective. The Sentinel's brow furrowed in confusion. We do? Yes, after all. Only with the duality of heaven and hell can there be balance. Orion went breathless. He was stunned not only that the words were correct, but also that they were spoken in a specific combination of ancient celestial and infernal. Only sentinels operating in secret knew the correct code, since it would change every other week and be dead-dropped to their own. And with these truths would we earn peace, he replied, the other half confirming contact. I didn't know others were working within the Imperial Union. Boxes within boxes, all to compartmentalise the operation. However, I've been told to meet with you now, since this is the best chance we have at killing King Locke. Killing Locke? My instructions were to report their plans and numbers. The solitaire shook their head. Things have changed. The king is a much larger threat than initially thought, and this is not just a simple raid for riches. There's something much larger at stake, which could break the world. What about the information you delivered? And the map? I have the means to recall it into my possession. The information I gave them is true, but I needed it to be brought into this meeting to earn his trust. However, the Imperial Union won't act if King Locke is out of the equation. He is the head of the snake, and the body will die. Orion slowly nodded in agreement. What do you propose? The solitaire pointed to the closest pillars. Hide somewhere and prepare an ambush. I have Severus's ear, so I'll call him away and lure him here. Give me a few minutes, and together we can bring an end to all this before it metastasizes. Once he's dead, we can escape through the opening in the wall. All right. I'll be here then. As the mysterious individual returned to the corridors, Orion unsheathed his sword and a wand crafted from bone. A small focus crystal was nested at the end and faintly glowed yellow upon his touch. He immediately felt a tingle coursing through the brainstem to his spinal column, arms, and hands, confirming a psychic connection with the arcane instrument. He dashed to a nearby column and pressed his body up against the pillar. The Sentinel hoped this plan would be successful, but cynicism from his experiences caused him to not fully trust the solitaire. Orion flicked the wand in a memorized pattern and whispered a draconic incantation, which translated to, Chameleon skin, hide thee in light and shadow. The tip of the wand glowed faintly white before he pointed it directly onto his shoulder. In less than a second, a colourless veil appeared to spread, and his body blended in with the surroundings until he was perfectly invisible. Only his own eyes could see the ghostly outline of where his form should be. 1 hour of cloaking, that should be enough time, he said to himself. And if this is a trap, there's nothing some explosions can't fix. The ceiling of the fortress creaked and groaned lowly, as if in response. Orion thought nothing of it at first, but the sound returned, and in shorter, repeated successions, almost as if they were a chuckle. Chameleon skin, hide thee in light and shadow. A bestial voice recited the incantation before switching to the common language. I know this tongue well. Intending to hide, do you? Orion froze in heightened caution. He slowly looked around and mentally traced a path for the collapsed wall. The spell had turned him invisible, but whoever or whatever was in here was well aware of his presence. If he intended to escape, Orion would have to consider how he would leave footprints in the snow as he moved. Either he would sneak his way slowly and hope his methodical pacing wouldn't betray his location, or he could cast another spell to create an illusory diversion. Alternatively, he could hope for the solitaire to return and they could salvage the situation together. Before Orion could decide, a massive icicle plummeted. Its impact sent him flying backwards off his feet. As the Sentinel slowly recovered his bearings, he saw the shard was actually an enormous quadruped creature with unfurled wings, snow-coloured scales, and an elongated neck ending with a reptilian snarl. Horror seeped from Orion's widened eyes to every bundle of nerves, as he realised a dragon stood between him and any opportunity for escape. You should have also masked your scent, the beast remarked. Before Orion had a chance to evade, its jaw opened grotesquely wide and blasted a blinding white beam that froze the very water molecules in the air. The breath attack lanced across the surface of the floor, creating jagged daggers of ice and connected with Orion's legs. In milliseconds, he felt his appendages freeze as if being burned alive, stabbed by thousands of knives. The dragon abruptly stopped its beam. It maliciously grinned as it slammed its claws down on the Sentinel's frozen legs, shattering them into red powder. "It's done!" the dragon called out, as Orion screamed and bawled in powerless despair. The doors swung open, and the solitaire returned with King Lock and the other guests. They crowded around the scene as Severus kneeled and disarmed the helpless man of his wand and sword. Laos Adams, or should I say, Orion Meffrey, Sentinel First Class of the Hegemony of Mistoria. Locke sneered as he stood back up to face the solitaire. You have my thanks. I'm pleasantly amused to see they've infiltrated this deep into our circle. My contact in their organisation has proven invaluable, they replied. Their agents in the Imperial Union are being hunted as we speak. And none too soon. They need to be absolutely blinded as we begin the next phase. The king bowed to the dragon and pointed at Orion's broken body. I did promise you a meal at this banquet, and here it is. Feel free to digest this individual. Slowly. As the beast leaned in, the last thing Orion imagined was a pleasant memory of his wife and children. Then he saw the insides of the dragon's jaw and felt every single one of its razor teeth